Well, it's 9:01, so why don't we go ahead and get started? I am Steve Banta, the Executive Director of Literacy Texas, here today for the Gulf Coast Symposium. I want to thank Ernest Lewis, the President and CEO of Adult Literacy, which organization? It's Adult Education Center. I'm remembering his original name. Adult Education Center. Ernest put this symposium together. We have a lot of high quality partners to help address this issue of what's changed since pandemic, what's going to go back to normal, and what is not going to go back to normal, and how are we going to move forward. So with that, I want to introduce Jackie Aguilera from the Mayor's Office for Adult Literacy, who is going to be moderating the panel. Jackie, good morning.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this exciting day. This is the 6th annual of the Gulf Coast Literacy Symposium. Welcome friends that we've known and new friends that we're going to make. We have an exciting and very hefty panel for you this morning, and I hope you are ready. And I am at the great pleasure of introducing your first panelists for the morning, because they're going to talk about MONEY. Yes, money, funding, yay, everything that everyone wants to know about, because it's a gas that keeps our programs going. So we have the wonderful, wonderful Jonita and Tara from the Funding Strategists this morning, as well as our magnificent Ernest Lewis, the Director and President of the Adult Education Center. So I'm going to let those guys briefly introduce themselves, and then I'm going to begin pitching balls so they can knock them out of the park like our Astros. Ernest.
Good morning, Jackie. So thank you and welcome everyone to the Gulf Coast Symposium. I'm excited to be here once again. I'm President and CEO of Adult Education Center. And just a little bit about me, I've been doing nonprofit for about 21 years for different causes, from homeless programs to youth, as well as adult education. So definitely we all have been impacted by COVID. So I think it's really great for us to have an opportunity to talk about some lessons learned. So glad to be here.
I'm Tara Thompson. I'm one half of the dynamic duo of the Funding Strategists. I have been in fund development, fundraising for about 20 years. I have an extensive background in Literacy Texas. I've been an AmeriCorps member. I've done ESL. I've taught ESL. I've designed curriculum, as well as I've taught with refugee populations, various populations. So I'm very abreast of what goes on in literacy, as well as in fundraising and how to keep the dollars going into. And so we bring a wealth of knowledge to you, and I'll pitch it over to Jonita to share her information.
Good morning. I'm Jonita Fair-Payton. I am the other half of the Funding Strategist, and I've been in fundraising for well over 30 years. So that is telling my age in a lot of ways. We work in probably every sector of nonprofits, and previously, before being the Funding Strategist, we worked in anything you can think of, from taking the trash out to leading organizations. And then that you learn a lot about not only fundraising, but all of the components that someone needs to mute. There we go. Not only fundraising, but all of the components that make for successful fundraising. So we're really happy to be here this morning, and we're ready to get started.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you guys so much. All right, so and away we go. Question number one, in this moment of COVID, the post-pandemic, what has been the most pressing challenges in fundraising to secure needed funding to support operations in March, as we march forward into 2022?
Okay. All right.
Playing hardball.
Okay.
Okay.
To just start off, I think that when we talked about this and really sat with this question, the challenges that we faced fundraising and organizations faced in the pandemic were very similar to the ones that you face every day. If you don't have diversified funding, then you're going to find yourself in a situation where it's difficult for you to kind of push through the tough times. And the pandemic was certainly a very tough time. For government funding, I think that there was a lull and it was difficult for people to really kind of get their hands around what would the country look like. We didn't know what was going to look like the next month, let alone the next 6 months. And organizations that rely very heavily on private dollars, they saw those halt, especially the individual donations, because people were very concerned about their own well-being, and if your organization then found a lot of support, which a lot of the smaller organizations have small businesses that are big donors for them. And small businesses did not fare well during the pandemic, therefore they weren't giving. So I'm gonna pitch it to Tara to kind of fill in the blanks with that, but I wanted to give the overview.
It comes down to sometimes you either had no fundraising plan because you did rely so heavily on government funding, or you had too rigid of a fund development plan where you only went to the same funders every year because they were the funders who fund you. So in this moment in COVID, when you needed to have your footprint in a lot of other arenas, funders gave to the individuals they knew. So what presented the challenge was, how do you get a funder to know who you are and to know your mission and do everything? And you only have been playing ball in one sandbox. You've only rode the swings in the playground, but you hadn't got on the monkey bars and all the other places. So diversification of funds is definitely one of the biggest challenges that we saw. Ernest?
Yes, I think those are very good points. So basically, just from our experience and just looking at research and looking at the footprint of nonprofits and how they were affected by COVID, about 75% of the nonprofits basically had negative impact on their revenue, which means it was reduction of funding, fundings were cut, or funding was really shifted to basic needs. So food, rent, to stabilize folk because we had high variances of unemployment. So it left some of us in adult literacy and other areas in a lurch. So also too, 37% of some of the nonprofits basically had reduction of workforce. So not only did they lose key essential positions, they lost fundraisers, right? So the folk who were actually out in the community raising those funds and then really leaving that roles and those responsibilities to the EDs or other staff, which causing more infrastructure strain. Some of the other challenges that I saw was definitely challenges accessing the PPP funds, right? So the payroll protection funds, small business administration funds, which were available due to the pandemic. So a lot of folks trying to figure out what that looks like. Do I have the infrastructure to tap into it? What is that financial ability to repay it back, and adding more pressure? But then also cash flow problems. So we all know about that really well, experiencing that for 3 to 6 months because you have reduction of revenue and earned revenue, but then also the lack of operation reserve. So that was another thing that we'll talk a little more about. It's not, if you don't have an operation reserve and a pandemic happens, even if you did have an endowment, it still would have really pushed you to the max, right? Because this has been our second year of that. And the recommendation is that you have a reserve for 9 to 12 months. So definitely those were some of the challenges that are short term and even moving forward. How do you address that in a meaningful way?
Thank you so much. Again, looking at the challenges part, and now that we've broken out a sweat, I want to ask you guys about short-term and long-term solutions as we move forward to bring financial relief. Anybody want to start off?
I can start.
Yes, ma'am.
With us, when we worked with our clients and we looked at how they would make short and long-term solutions, the first thing we did was saw how they could reduce their overhead. And some of the organizations did give up their physical locations and they went virtual. They realized that they had these offices, but their workforce really worked out in the community. So they really weren't in the office that much. So when they looked at how they could reduce overhead, the office space was one of the things that if they were able to get out of leases or whatever they had, they were able to reduce that overhead. One of the other ones was cross-training of employees. It goes back to what Ernest was saying. You had people who may have been in one department, but now that department is no longer needed at this point. And so training them maybe to be virtual instructors. Like, for instance, we had an organization we worked for, and they were hands-on doing early childhood videos and instructions. And so they brought some of their office staff over, and they taught them how to tape the videos, and they got the instructional design training, and they actually were able to facilitate the workshops and do the YouTube videos, while the other ones who were the teachers did the live action. So it was just cross-training the employees to work in other departments and reutilizing places where you might have had consultants come in utilizing your staff. Jonita, you want to?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that you said. And also reducing costs kind of short term. I think organizations just realized how much money they actually wasted on things that you didn't need anymore. I know that for the smaller organizations, supply costs went down tremendously, and there was an overhaul of how much we actually spend day to day on operations, how much we spend on meeting prep. All of these things really do hit your bottom line. So for organizations, just understanding that we can really work more effectively and efficiently virtually made a great impact on their bottom line. And Ernest, I know you can speak to that because you all shifted tremendously.
Yeah. So for us, basically, once again, just adding to what Jonita and Tara said, was that definitely you have to look at the reduction of overhead, because that's going to be very important. And even as you continue to fundraise during these unique, challenging times, funders are going to be looking at that overhead to see how lean it is, how efficient it is, but then also looking at the reduction of costs. So one of the things that we have to do at the center was look at a very lean, robust way of looking at what costs we can reduce, but reallocate them so that we can be better prepared and more responsive to deal on the technological front, right? So we moved everything to hybrid and virtual. So making sure that we have more dollars for virtual learning, making sure we have more dollars and for training of staff. So those things you need to have to look at. And some of the things that you said about office space was very key, of actually implementing telework days for your team to increase productivity, self-care, all of those things. But also what's important too is leveraging that federal support, those PP dollars and SBA, or it's still funding. So even though that you get those dollars, the PPP is forgiven. So that really helps your bottom line, because that's dollars that you didn't account for, you didn't expect, but it did help you through some of those rough waters, right? On the SBA front, it is a 30-year loan with a 3% interest rate that you can get up to $500,000, depending on your receivables. So being able to be smart about those resources and leveraging it to get you out of the hole, but also having a formidable plan to really grow your revenue and diversify it, as we talked about. Another thing that we are looking at is that we have to build capacity, because capacity was always a need prior to the pandemic, right? But the pandemic really shined the light on some of those gaps, right, that we need on the social media front. But then also too, looking at, remember that theory where we said everyone is a fundraiser and agency? It is true now.
It is, definitely.
So making sure everyone has an aspect of, whether it's stewardship or cultivation, to make sure that no money is left on the table, and then everyone is moving in the same method to make sure that that agency is sustainable. So communication is very important, and building capacity there on the messaging to the donors. What are those needs? What are the unmet needs? How are we being resilient during these times? Contingency planning is an area as nonprofits we don't always plan for.
Right.
So that is one thing that we have to look at, opposed to just doing it to appease a funder or a federal contract, but to actually live it and to actually plan for that.
Yeah.
Ernest, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I didn't want to forget. So when I know that you are in probably your budget planning period now for the next year, if I remember your cycle. How has this pandemic kind of affected you planning for contingencies or downscaling or all of that in the next year? Because this is the real first full year that you'll have the ability to be able to plan kind of sort of post-pandemic, but not really. How has that affected the budgeting for the next year? I'm sorry, Jack.
So for us, we are still planning as if a pandemic is coming back. And I
Okay.
think that we cannot put our guard down. So you have to be very vigilant and also anticipate reductions. Even though it is on an upswing and events are coming back, you still have to plan for the reduction and be conservative, but also be innovative in a way. Because a lot of foundations now are looking at different opportunities of how are you going to increase the masses with satellite locations and technology. So those are some opportunities there. But also too, we're relying on securing pro bono services. So services that we would have paid for, we're leaning on some of those relationships that we have. We're bartering in ways that we haven't before. But then also too, just looking at different initiatives to where we can bring unrestricted dollars in that we talk a lot about, Tara and Jonita. And we saw a lot of the stimulus checks, share my stimulus check hashtag, right? So looking at some of those initiatives to where individuals who may not need that stimulus check can reinvest it into noteworthy causes or just dedicating a portion of their refund. So those are some of the things that we're looking at on implementing in our annual fund initiatives of saying, okay, how can we not overtax folk, but definitely look at different ways of how we can still get the need that we want. But it's just really a trial and error. And then also too, we're just looking at how do we move our events virtual and hybrid. So it no longer will be the season of in-person events. We definitely would have to do live stream as well, because we have some donors who appreciate being able to attend a gala in their pajamas and not have to dress up, but can still make a gift, right? So we still don't want to lose those individuals or isolate them, but then how do we become inclusive since, you know, and then figure out how do we keep them engaged?
Right, because you're going to have some donors that are still going to want to put their hats on and come too. So what does a hybrid look like that really meets everyone's need? And I know Tara and I are with one of our clients, it's difficult because they are a face-to-face organization where they get energized, their community gets energized by seeing each other and the clients, and they give based on that. So moving towards a hybrid or virtual takes a lot of planning and a lot of creativity.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and that's probably where, you know, the next question comes in, because, you know, we bat around these terms, we bat around these ideas, but the talk and the action sometimes are different. So going into hybrid fundraising, going into that digital-based venue, taking our funders and donors to the new land, how? What are the steps? What are you guys doing? What have you learned? What are you adopting? And what are you testing?
I want to test TikTok. I don't know about TikTok, but and in all seriousness, it's actually one of the most sought after platforms at this point. So whether we want to do it or not, we're going to have to be able to be adaptable. So one thing that COVID has taught us is that you have to get out of your comfort zone, and you're going to have to figure out how to engage different demographics. So for instance, younger demographics at this point is something that we really need to gear towards. A lot of folk that were really affected because of COVID was between 19 and 64 years of age. So whether it was contracting the disease or definitely unemployment or whatever. So that's the prime age for our donor base, right? So how do we integrate those folk and keep them engaged? So using TikTok is one way of doing that. Another way is communication toolkit. So how do we broaden that in a way to where it's meaningful and not overtaxing us, especially if you're a small shop? But one of the most things that I'm kind of looking at and figuring out is how can we do collaborative ask? So Tara and Jonita, we always talked about that. How did you do the collaborative ask? And now this is the season more than ever to do the collaborative ask with similar partners so that you can approach and leverage your support, your capacity, but then also to collaborative giving days. So like when Giving Tuesday is coming, all of us are going to just kill ourselves, right? Getting those initiatives out. But what if we do a cluster of 5 or 6 of us, similar organizations, and do a Giving Tuesday where we can leverage our contacts? Let's say, for instance, that's 10,000 or 50,000 together, and we leverage that. And then look at the immense scope. We're not killing ourselves or taxing our infrastructure, but we actually can triple or quadruple that return.
You know, Ernest, and I want to just jump in briefly because I have to salute and applaud Literacy Texas for doing something so innovative. They did that statewide collaborative fundraiser.
Yeah.
And the call was out, you know, across the state for providers to participate and split the pot. I mean, again, changing our mindset. This is collaboration over competition. And this is even more important in this post-pandemic era. I just had to jump in on that. You guys continue. You guys are doing good.
But I love that collaboration over competition because people do not think that way. That's yeah.
And I love the TikTok.
Yeah.
I was thinking about you could do a TikTok challenge. You know, that's what it is. So it's a TikTok giving challenge. You know, you come up with some quirky dance and it's a TikTok giving challenge, and you cannot halt the collaborations and partners with sharing resources. I'm going to tell you this just personally. I know Ernest made a bunch of money off me last year because I use Amazon Smile.
Yeah.
So definitely utilize Amazon Smile. Everybody is ordering.
Especially during the pandemic.
Especially during the pandemic. So I know it might just be, but every dime counts.
Yeah.
So, you know, if Ernest, you saw a big jump come from Amazon Smile, it probably came from the Thompson household.
Probably did, Ernest. I'll affirm that. I think one of the things here, and I also learned, is that you have to know your population really well. We have a client that serves primarily refugees. And they use WhatsApp, and it's not something that we had used, but they use it faithfully. So we use that to be able to distribute small videos, information about PPE distribution, information about upcoming events, and even information about ways you could give and help. So I think along with TikTok, knowing that demographic, you have to know how to speak to that. So we've seen, you know, WhatsApp work for them, not so much Facebook anymore, but Instagram in some ways. You just have to keep growing with the trends.
Right. Also, too, what I've seen work is these month-long campaigns or celebrations. So let's say, for instance, if you have an anniversary, you're celebrating 35 years of operation. Even though it's a pandemic, it doesn't mean that you still cannot celebrate. So making sure that you still lean in on those and still share good news, because folk are looking for that. But the month-long digital campaigns that it can be via Instagram, via Twitter, it can be stories. But then also, one of the best practices that's moving forward, and something that we're implementing at the center, is how do you move social media followers to donors? I'm gonna say that again, and I'm not a preacher, but how do you, move your social media followers to donors? Because we have some donors who follow us, right? But we probably have, like everyone else, have a lot of followers who are not actually ingrained in the work, right? They like the page. So really spending some time on figuring out how do I engage them to be part of the mission and invest in my mission. So looking at all of your channels, whether it's YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, but looking at what is that strategy to actually engage them. And ways of doing that is starting Facebook groups. So like with Literacy Texas, we have a Facebook group for this particular symposium. So definitely log into that. But looking at what are those ways, those small incremental ways of how we can get folk to give to our mission. So that's really important. And that's something that we haven't had to consider in the past.
Right. I think we talk a lot about fundraising being about relationships, and it very much is. But in the digital age, you build relationships by sharing information. And it doesn't always have to be ask. It can be information that's just vital to the community or about your organization. And having that come incrementally, sharing, stories and statistics and information and common knowledge over an extended period of time, we're in relationship with each other. I'm beginning to rely on you to be my source of information and truth and history and knowledge and all of those things. So when you then come to me and say, hey, support this cause, I do. It's just like, you have a friend that you talk to all the time and you are supporting each other and you're sharing information, and that friend is in crisis. You automatically help that friend in crisis. Whereas a friend you hadn't talked to in 7 years calls you and you're in crisis, your giving may be different. It's a continuous relationship of sharing information that builds that trust. And then you begin to give more. And we have to think about fundraising in that way. I think we get too heady about it. And it is really about how you nurture relationships.
Yes, it definitely is, because we all are in the nonprofit industry, and different funding opportunities comes across all of our desks, and they don't always fit our mission. But if you know they're a mission match for another organization, share that resource with them. And then you all will begin to have that relationship where you'll begin to share funding opportunities. And it may be a way that you can be written into that funding opportunity, and then it helps everyone. But don't just see the information and not share it. This is a sharing age. In order for everyone to succeed and continue to push their mission and visions in fundraising season, you have to share resources.
Right.
Pivotal.
Yep, absolutely. We have to stop being afraid of sharing.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
so long in the worst pocket, nonprofit, which needs it the most. We have been the most competitive, crabs in a bucket, and we need to stop. We're preaching to the choir here because we're all here because we're innovators. What about our board, our donors, our funders? How do we sell them on the new ideas when they say, well, that used to work pre-pandemic. Why don't we just go back to doing that? How do we sell people on these new strategies, these new ideas, and the new challenges that our organizations are facing?
So we can start. Jonita shared that one of our biggest ways that one of our organizations communicates with its board and with everyone is WhatsApp, and they communicate through pictures and videos. And in this day and age, storytelling is pivotal.
Yeah.
And so you have to let your funders actually see the need versus writing these wonderful explanations and writing the stories. They need to see the stories. So it's basically taking them to the people. So as you're on the front line, doing your service work out in the community, take videos, tape individuals, do chats. I know one of our organizations just partnered with the YMCA, and they just had this big event, and they just invited all the boards and the stakeholders out there, and they videoed, and it was on live, Facebook Live, as you use the digital media. And so people who were engaged and stakeholders in the community saw the need, saw the line firsthand. They didn't hear about it on the news. They didn't hear about it anywhere. They actually saw the people who were asking them for money, doing the work, and saw the people out there in the need. And that is one of the things that we feel that still engages your board and stakeholders in funding right now.
And to speak on that, because I was speaking about boards and partnerships, and this may not be the perfect segue, but it came up. I think your board has to be not only a partnership in the work, but they have to see a true picture of what your organization does. A lot of times with nonprofits, we think, oh, the board is here and we need to make sure that everything looks good for them. They need to see the ins and outs, the nitty gritty of what your organization does, what your staff do, and what that looks like. And they need to be an integral part of that. So in that, I think we get really caught up into, these plans. Our fundraising plan says we're supposed to be here, here, and here. Our strategic plan says we're supposed to be here, here, and here. Our program plan says we're supposed to be here, here, and here. All of those are very fluid documents. And if they are something that is stringent and stiff, your organization is going to suffer. And your board needs to understand that we may have always done business this way, but it's not working. Your organization has to be fluid in the sense that it knows there are times you have to move beyond what's on paper and do what actually works. And they have to be a part of that. Ernest, I know you have something to add to that.
I do. So part of it is especially with the pandemic, we have to be even more resilient with the communication. So constant communication was needed with the funders, with stakeholders, with staff. And it's really communicating that the agency is resilient, we are progressing, these are the steps that we're taking, this is the impact that we're making. And then actually communicating what our needs are. What are the needs of the clients? What are the needs of our staff? What are some of those unmet needs? So making sure that you put that out there, that you're having those conversations, you're doing them through constant contact, through newsletters, you're doing it through videos, but then also not forgetting about stewardship, because stewardship is very important in building those relationships. So there are a lot of platforms that you can use now where you can send videos thanking donors.
Yeah.
And I can't remember I don't know if it's Boom Boom or something, but I'll send it later. But it's a video, and one of my fellow board members, Alba Austin, who can't join us today, actually told me about it. But it's a video where you can actually send thank yous to your donors. So just imagine of doing a immediate video to thank them for their gift, and it's coming from a board member or a client, just really thanking them, and look at that impact and how quick it is, right? So, but also too, looking at how do we just maintain open and regular communication, because the donors are basically looking to know, how are you doing? So we definitely want to make sure that we're doing that. We're also posting on social media 1 to 2 times a week is very important. I know one of the things that we did was Wisdom Wednesdays. Not that we are Oprah or Yana, but we definitely wanted folks just to kind of have some positivity going. We also did Mental Health Mondays, and it was all just kind of engaging the community and our stakeholders.
Right.
But then also too, we have different apps that says great happenings at the center. So we got a particular grant or a particular student earned their GED, we definitely were just putting that out there. There's a positive energy, but then also too, it helps donors understand whether it's their return on investment. They're looking at those mission moments. That's really important. So when you're doing your appeals, not your appeals, but your social media and communication, I have to really emphasize it has to be a healthy mix of appeals when you're asking for money, but then also when you're cultivating or communicating, because you don't want to mix the two to where you're constantly asking. So a lot of folks will say every time you send a post, you need to have a donate button. Absolutely not.
No.
It needs to be purposeful when you want to do that. But then one of the things, best practice that works, and that especially during COVID can really bring and garner a lot of support, are funder briefings. So what is funder briefings, right? So funder briefings are basically Zoom meetings where you're getting your funders together and you're giving them high-level briefings on just the outcomes. You may play a video. You might just give them an update from just the ED or the program, and you're getting all of them in one space, virtual space, to really see what their investment is. And it's not something that you would do every week, every month, maybe bi-monthly or quarterly. And it just really speaks to the volume of the work that you're doing and the effort you're making to keep those communications clean, consistent, but then also build those relationships. And then you can always ask a funder to co-host with you from peer to peer. So it can definitely be existing funders or new funders. So funder briefings.
I think
I didn't come up with that idea, but I researched it. So don't say Ernest came up with that, because I don't want to get sued. But funder briefings is a thing. Yeah.
And I just want to add, when you're talking about communication strategies, all of these things are wonderful ways to do that. But you also have to remember to don't be afraid to pick up the phone sometime and just say thank you, I appreciate you, or how are you doing? And it doesn't have to be related to an ask at all. You were on my mind. I was thinking about you. I just wanted to check in to say we appreciate you, and just to see how you're doing in this season. That will go a long way.
Yeah, because that goes back to what Jonita mentioned at a previous question, that some of your donors and funders are business owners. And they own corporations, small businesses, and so they're struggling. And if they're still donating to you, and we're in a pandemic, every funding level hurt in this pandemic, except maybe, a few others, but they hurt. And so most of our funders did. And so we need to make sure we check on them. So those Wellness Wednesdays will be great that Ernest talked about, just to say Wellness Wednesday, we're calling this funder to just say, hey, how you doing?
Yeah, how you doing? We appreciate you, whether they gave or not this year or not.
Yes,
we appreciate
exactly.
you. We just want to check in to see how you're doing.
And it means a lot. So what we did at the center when COVID happened, I just sent emails and calls of just saying, how is this team going? How are things going with some of our funders? And then definitely I do try to keep a pulse as best as I can, because we're a small shop. but I do think it's very important. And we do have funders who actually have reached out to us and checked on us. I think I do have one of our funders here from United Way, and they were very good at really just connecting the dots to make sure everyone was great. What were some of the needs? And I think that it has to go both ways. So the relationship should not be transactional, especially during these times, because folk remember that when, you did the wellness call to see how I was doing, it was how my family is doing. And then when it's time to make that ask, it's appreciated. And
Right.
they remember that, and then it adds even more value to it.
Yes, definitely.
These are the golden nuggets here, and building those relationships again, that personal touch in a very impersonal environment right now. A lot of us are on occasion where we're learning we're not just little boxes, and that's a nice feeling to remember again. Let's look internally, because our organizations exist to serve.
Yeah.
So how are you guys meeting those service gaps, reassessing the client, the student experience to ensure equity without compromising that quality? How are you guys doing this?
Ernest, you want to lead with that one?
That's a good one. So for us, we had to take a hard look at the programs that we have and exactly what programs are most needed at this point. So one of the things that we've learned with COVID is that those needs are emerging. They were different, right? Every day it changes. And then my background also is disaster recovery. So we've dealt with every type of hurricane I can. I've Katrina, Ike, all of them, Rita. So with that, we have to be flexible and bendable to adapt to what those needs are without having mission drift, right? But then also too, being able to have a strong enough relationship with funders to have those conversations as to what those unmet needs are, what those gaps are, and trying to get initiatives and support for that. So one example for us was that we had a digital divide of our students. A lot of them did not have laptops. They were in class for about 3 hours, so they really couldn't see on their phones, so they're having vision issues and things like that. So what we did was we leveraged our relationships with Centerpoint, which they gifted us laptops where we were able to give to our HSE, ESL students. But then also too, we are able to leverage contacts with HEB where we received technology grants to buy laptops as well. So I do think of really keeping a strong pulse on the emerging needs of your clients and having those wellness calls with them as well in surveys, but then also using that data and then actually leveraging that support and then actually pitching what those needs are to your funders are very key.
Very good. That's very good. Thank you for saying that, Ernest, because we're talking a lot about moving our operations to virtual and how that makes sense in the pandemic. But if your clients don't have laptops and internet service, then none of that makes any sense. So you have to really understand the population you serve.
So, and what we go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Tara.
Okay. No. So pretty much, Ernest spoke from the organization point of view. And so when we go in with our clients, we say, let's plan, let's work on some plans. And when Ernest hit disaster recovery, we're in Houston. We are Hurricane City,
Yes.
and so
we're always 1 week away from we're
right,
1 week away from
always 1 week away. And it's always a 50% chance of rain. I don't care what the man says, and it's gonna flood. So you have to be fluid. It has to be and you have to know that your organization is evolving and some things are going to change. And we know that we have flagship programs, and we know we have programs that we have been doing for the 30 years that the organization has been in existence, but times are changing and there are ways to spruce up without losing the mission. There are ways to do those things. And don't be afraid to try that, and don't be afraid to do that. But fluidity is key, and knowing that you're going to evolve and having those disaster plans. Like the pandemic, if you would have had a hurricane plan or a disaster plan, yes, the pandemic would have thrown you off, but your students still couldn't get to your center if it was a hurricane. So, it's still, so just having some of those ways that you would serve when face-to-face cannot be done, just putting those contingency plans in place is very key.
Yeah, and more than just the physicality of them being able to get to you. What we didn't plan on or understand is that, for instance, in Ernest's organization, had Ernest gotten COVID and been out for 2 months, do you have a plan for that?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Exactly.
If Ernest and 2 of his teachers had been out for 3 months, can your organization survive that? What does that look like? Those kinds of things we had not thought about before that we have to think about now. So your planning needs to include, yes, how do we reach our clients? You know, how do we talk to our stakeholders? But what does it look like in terms of leadership and service providers if someone is taken out? And we always kind of jokingly say, well, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, what will happen? But you really do need to plan that if your whole 5 people in your organization are sick, what do you do? So disaster planning looks very different now, and we have got to have plans that reflect the times.
Yeah, and I think succession planning is very important, even in fundraising, like you said, Jonita, because even though folk were getting sick and things like that, folk were retiring and folk were burned out and saying, you know what, I want to sit down and take a break and taking sabbaticals. So part of that, especially in the fundraising field, is that succession planning is very, very, very key to where that cross training, which we spoke about earlier, is very important. And then some of us had to furlough folk. So looking at what does that look like is very important. And a big thing too, just depending on just the culture that we're in right now, where we're dealing with a lot of inclusiveness, diversity, race relations, all of that. So we definitely have to lean in that as well as organizations, because there's a lot of funding out there for Black-led organizations that serving communities of color, indigenous, all of those things, right? So definitely, yeah, Chick-fil-A and different other foundations that are looking to fund that work. So when you're doing your prospect research, look for those particular initiatives, because they're looking for technology upgrades, because I think Coca-Cola right now is a big one. But then Chick-fil-A was another. So there's a lot of money out there that we really need to look at once you're rebuilding your programs, your fund development programs, and seeing what are some of those strategic partners that you want to go after, because inclusiveness and diversity are in those applications. Right. And a lot of them are asking, what is your board commitment, your organizational commitment to these priorities? And you need to be prepared to talk about it, but to also implement it. And that's going to be very important. So it's not going to be a surface as we all have done in the past. It will have to be a little deeper. So those are some of the shifts that we're seeing in the community as well from our funders and foundations and all.
I'm definitely, and just to continue on that, it has to be more than just a diversity training or inclusivity training. It has to be a culture that's implementing a strategic plan. It has to be in how you begin to instruct and how you fundraise. It has to show that it now is part of your culture. And so, and that's key to fundraising, because now funders are looking at, we serve populations of multicultural populations, a lot of, especially in ESL, in literacy, it's a lot of multiculturalism in that sector. And so how we fundraise has to show who we serve, how we serve. And so we have to begin to let that culture shine through. So we have to really, really incorporate that inclusivity in our culture. Definitely.
Yeah, it's important.
Very important.
That transition from, true responding to recovery and sustainability, looking at the opportunities, looking at the organizations that you work with, Tara and Jonita, Ernest, with your own organization, what are you seeing now, and what is the transition rate, and what are the plans, suggestions for sustainability in the post-pandemic reality?
So I can say for us, and this has been, and some of my staff is on the call, so thank y'all for joining. So for us, it is about self-preservation and self-care, right? So the pandemic has taken a lot out of everyone. So not only the organization, but then also people self-care. So you're seeing a lot of burnout, you're seeing a lot of turnover, all of those things. So how do we ensure that we are still whole, right, in our wellness and all. And then basically, when you're whole, definitely then you can do your job, you can fundraise, you can do those type of things. So I think part of the recovery thing is to make sure your staff, your board, your clients are good, and making sure that you have the self-care days and things like that. So one of the things that we've done is basically have telework days. So once a week, all of us, not all of us, but once a week, we have a day. So at different, we kind of tailor it where we have someone at all times at the office. But part of that is because just that commute to work can be taxing, right? It can be very stressful. So looking at those type of things, but then also too, looking at what recovery is and looking at how do we phase in some of these things. So like now we're trying to build up our foundational support. So looking at how do we look at our existing funders, we communicate what our needs are, unmet needs, how we're going to grow it or deepen that work. And then we also look at then the individual pocket, which would be special events or individuals, and then how do we cultivate that in a meaningful way. So for us, we're looking at how can we still sustain operation dollars, and then we also have some capital needs that we're now looking to explore. And that's part of the planning that we're doing. So we have a capacity gap right now to where we need an advancement manager, which will help me fundraise, right? So we have to take time to really carve out what does that look like? What are some of those key priorities of that position to get us to the next normal? So we knew that we would have to make that strategic investment. And that's why I'm saying you need to leverage some of that support that you get. So if you got PPP loans or SBA loans, maybe looking at how can you leverage some of that to make some of those capacity infrastructure investments to get you to the next normal or that next level on the other side of this pandemic.
Yeah. That goes into, you have to invest in your staff professionally, professional development. And work-life balance is key. So all of that was definitely what was hitting on me. What the pandemic taught you was that your staff was human. Even if they came into your office and was Superwoman and Superman and did everything you need them to do and more, you realize that they might have their Superman and Superwoman at home, and they may have 4 or 5 kids, and they have a husband, and they have all of this, and they were homeschooling and helping your organization run all at the same time. And so it helps to keep that mindfulness as you scale back up what you're offering. So the telework and everything is key. Maybe in the a suggestion I would give is in your first quarter or your first half of the year, stick to your core programs. Do what you do best. You can sustain those programs. Don't as your staff is getting some professional development, you might have found an avenue that you liked during COVID and you want to incorporate. So spend the time to get trained on how to do it and see if it's a mission match. So stick to your core programs. That way you're not overworking your staff, but they are getting much needed training to how they will help you scale up better. You'll have a better trained staff and you will have work-life balance. I can't stress enough, just develop contingency plans, sustainability, have those succession plans, have what happens. Ernest talked about building the reserve. I mean, it's going to take some time to build it back up now, but just think about develop your plan on how you can do those things. Like get into the mindset of knowing that Jonita talked about the bus, but COVID was that proverbial bus. It was the bus. It hit the organizations hard. And, now what do we do? So you have to think about how to plan for that. I think that's very key to sustainability in that.
And I think also for us, what's important too for nonprofits, what we have to look at is you have to have part of that contingency plan is to reserve, right? But then also looking at your debt and what is the debt service. So looking at what your liability is on your balance sheet. How are you going to get that down? And we were able to pay debt down during the pandemic, and it took a lot of hard work. But then also too, you're looking at the debt and then you're looking at what's expensive debt versus what is inexpensive debt, right? And there is such a thing as good debt. So also looking at how can you acquire lines of credit in times of emergency. So if you have banking partners, so if you're Chase or Frost or whatever your banking partner may be, Capital One, making sure that you have a line of credit in place just in case there's an emergency. Because if money is getting cash flow is an issue, you have that line of credit that you can lean on. So that's very important as long as trying to build your reserve as well. And that reserve is basically just for that rainy day. And you know, the pandemic has been that, but also too, you can have special appeals to build that fund, or it could be your annual fund. It could be any surplus dollars that you may have. It could be the events proceeds. So basically just carving that out, because we don't have the luxury anymore of not planning for emergencies at this point, because you definitely want to make sure that you have that. And a lot of foundations at this point are looking at what are those plans. And also send y'all questions too for the chat so that we can be able to answer any questions y'all may have.
Yeah, that's the reminder we're just about to jump in on too. If you guys, as you're thinking, as you know, these wonderful information is being shared with you, these experiences, everything that you can relate to, or even that you can't relate to, even more so, please put those questions in the chat box. We talked about, you know, briefly the digital divide. You mentioned, you know, the needs. We mentioned technology, internet access, but then of course, skills and the know-how, juggling that. And again, we talked about, you know, with some board members or funders thinking, let's just go back to the way it was. Well, you know, with students, clients doing the same thing. When are we going back to what we used to do? This is a question that's trying to be answered across universities, colleges, and certainly in our field. So what are you guys seeing with that? What are you seeing is happening to try and adapt and, you know, onboard and still serve the diversity of clients that's now split between pro technology and pro let's go back to the classroom, and you know, computers are just fun little things.
Yeah. So
I think that the new normal is that we're going to have to be consistently evolving and understanding that we have to serve not only our clients, our constituents, even our coworkers differently. And there's not going to be one answer that meets everything. And I think long gone are the, oh, we come, we sit in the classroom, we deliver material, you go study and you come back. That is not going to exist again. And it's not bad. It's just where we are now. And we have to transition with that. And I think that definitive answers to how it will look next year don't exist. We just have to look at, you know, what is working now and enhance that and continue to evolve in a way that makes sense for the people that we serve.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's going to be really important and in your vocabulary as nonprofit leaders, especially fundraisers, is reimagine, right?
Right.
We have to reimagine the work. So we have to reimagine the work from grant writing perspective, because now everything is being moved to a portal. And you have to do everything in 500 words or 1,500, they got to be concise. So how do you, 500, 1,500 words, right?
Right.
So
We just had something that was almost 2,000 words and it was beautiful.
Yeah.
And we had to get it down to 500 words. It took us about 3 hours.
Right. So now it's about being concise and being able to communicate your impact and the return on investment and what are you trying to do. So reimagining the work, and then really leaning in on collaborations and being lean. And what I mean by being lean is being efficient, right? And investing in the capacity and infrastructure that you need. And then also too, we have to look at technology now, opposed to being a barrier or burdened, but as a valuable resource. Because as nonprofits, we was like, okay, that is really expensive. We can't afford an IT person. That's the last person we hire. That and facilities, right? So with that, we have to look at, get that in the forefront of the work, because now we can't ignore it any longer. So we have to make those investments and then actually do the prospect research for those funders to be able to invest in that. And to be able to have those when you're pitching your meetings, when you're building your programs or looking at your program plans, technology is a big part of that. So that's going to be very important but then also too, how do you incorporate your scenario planning? And that's another thing that we do at Literacy Texas. I do a training on nonprofit finance, and we do a tool called scenario planning. And I always call it the good, the bad, the ugly, right? What is the good scenario? What is the bad scenario? What is the ugly scenario? And that's really depending on what is the revenue targets? What is the probability of us getting it? What is the probability of renewals? What is the probability of reduction? And in the case of that, you have that funding footprint, right? Or forecast, but your program should be aligned with that. So that basically informs what is the level of service you're going to do, the level of staffing you're going to have, so that you don't have any surprises, but then also too, you have given it a lot of forethought. But it is flexible again, because things happen.
Excellent. Well, you know, that tips us into expanding that partner footprint. What does the new partner look like? What does the new funder look like? Given the context, as you just spoke so eloquently, technology driven, hybrid, embracing the technology, letting the technology work for us. What is the new, what's the new plan? How do we address, and who are the new partners?
Right.
I think,
Go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say, one of the things that is gonna have to happen is we talk about partnerships and contingencies and not doing things in silos. But I think as organizations are beginning their strategic planning process, you need to be doing that in kind of collaboration and alignment with other organizations. And that is a different thought process where we are planning for the next 3 years. What are you all planning the next 3 years? And how can we work together in that plan? If we're planning to expand in this particular neighborhood or this particular college, do you all have like plans? How can we combine services? If we're offering instruction and you're offering mentorships, let's align our plans so that they make sense. And that's something that organizations really haven't done before. And Tara and I have been talking about working with organizations to think about not just the next 2 months, but the next 2 years. You can say, well, I'm going to build 5 partnerships. We see that all the time on strategic plans. Who are you going to build them with? And if you know those 5 organizations, then let's co-plan.
That's right.
Yeah.
We call it community cultivation. I'm
Right.
sure it's a word, I'm sure somebody, but we call it community cultivation.
We're also infamous for making up words.
We are. So when we do any work for any nonprofit, part of our work in strategic planning is community cultivation. We ask you who else, again, I use the playground analogy, and Ernest knows this. We told him, you don't play well in the sandbox. Well, you might not play well in the sandbox. Who's in your community? So you need to know who's in your community so you all can cultivate ways you can serve your community. So Jackie asked, who's the new funder? The new funder is not the grandparents who had these endowments that just said, I'm going to give to these organizations for 10 and 12 years until it is. Their grandkids have taken over in some way, shape, or forms, and they're more service oriented. They want to see the footprint. They want to know what's going on. So the new funder wants to know, how are you going to impact the community for the long run? They just don't want to know when this project is over in 1 or 2 years. And we always write these long things about, we're going to have sustainability and the impact is immeasurable or whatever, but they really want to know, what are you going to establish in its community that, again, if something happens to you, can someone pick up the mantle and keep going on? So the new funder is involved. I think they're more involved. The site visits are going to be more than just coming in, making sure you have a building and looking at your books. They want to know what your footprint is. What are you leaving behind? What's in your time capsule that's going to be evolved in the next 20 or 30 years. And they're going to see what your organization has done. To me, that's who the new funder is. And that's what your organization has to embrace. And you have to think about how that works for you. And it does come with partnerships and collaborations and building community.
So I think too, like the partnership footprint, and I think that we have to be very aggressive with those. So for us, we have to do satellite models. So we have actually went out and cultivated relationships with University of Houston, Clear Lake Pearland location. And why did we do that? We did that because we definitely wanted to get more space for in-person, but then also too, universities actually have the infrastructure for technology. So we not necessarily have to expend the dollars on technology, but we can definitely benefit from that from our strategic partner.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you have that mission alignment, you can definitely have those mutual benefits.
Mm-hmm.
And I also call them just anchor organizations, right? So you got the banks, you have the hospitals, of looking at how can you strategically grow the work without it costing you anything as far as financially. So it can be non-financial memorandum of understanding to grow the work. So the Chamber of Commerce is another key area because it's giving you a whole footprint of businesses as well, to where you can maybe get sponsorships for your events, but even also you making it volunteerism from some of their employees. But the cities as well, so the municipalities of the city, county, and state, there's a lot of community development block grant dollars right now for programming and for capital improvements. So even though during COVID, a lot of our buildings did withstand some damage because they were closed up. So you got mold outbreaks, you got just a whole number of things of improvements that you may need for technology. So looking at the cities as well to see what programs that they have that's related to COVID response or diversity or inclusion is very important to look at. And now is the time as well to be looking for state and national grants as well, because there's a lot of those that are coming down the pike. That they are not being so restrictive geographically. But definitely if you're willing to reimagine and do the extra work, then I think it's worth it. But then also looking at some of the federal dollars. So there's a lot of federal contracts that are coming out that's building communications infrastructure, right? So definitely that's once again important for you to look at those cluster models of working with like-minded organizations to where you can actually do those collaborative grants is very important, and to look at how can you scale that up in a meaningful way.
You know, this is so exciting because, I mean, here it is, we're talking about moving forward, but not just moving forward, actually creating this legacy so that no matter who is in charge, it's about the service to the community. Mayor Turner yesterday at the groundbreaking for the Nemo's Place, he mentioned that, you know, this was not about brick and mortar. It was about investing in the right thing to do for the people. I want to jump on something you dared to mention, Ernest. Okay. Satellite. You mean we're going to leave our building? We're actually going to go out and into the community and make these partnerships. I mean, you know, wow.
So I think part of it is that we have to start looking at, because we come from, well, I can say me, is that we always came about need a building to drive programs and services. And that's not necessarily the reality anymore. And I think that it's different ways that you can do it, because now you're in a virtual hub to where you have like affiliates like of CBS that's local here, and other businesses definitely have closed their home shops to where everyone is working from home to cut costs, but then productivity has increased. So looking at how can we do that in a meaningful way, but then also to figuring out how can it cut costs, productivity, but still advance your mission. Because buildings are expensive. I mean, my staff and we can attest to that. They're expensive, and then there's maintenance and things like that. So this is also giving us a new set of eyes and a different lens of how to reimagine what we're doing.
And definitely, and don't just look at, you know, when you're thinking about satellites. And Ernest did give some great places like the colleges or different things, but look at businesses. He just mentioned productivity increase. So they have a workforce. Their workforce might need your assistance. Like, think outside the box onto how you can serve a small business who still needs the brick and mortar, but they might not need all their space. You might be able to put a satellite somewhere. Now you have a partner, you might be able to serve them. So begin to truly, it pays to get some strategic visioning, or just sit down and think about how you can cultivate in your community. Think about what's surrounding you and how you can help who's in your community. That's invaluable community cultivation is invaluable.
Right. One of the things I thought was pretty genius during the pandemic is that there were a lot of companies that were furloughing and laying people off or just flat out letting them go. And one of the people that we work with is a workforce development kind of organization. And they were able to pivot that into offering packages to individuals that were being laid off or furloughed, and it was an income stream for them. So look at how you can help those that may be displaced or may need continuing education. You can package that to corporations who are having to downsize, because they do, a lot of them do want to do right by the people that will be no longer employed. And packages that include additional learning opportunities or job placement or wherever your niche is can be something that can be a revenue stream for you.
Yeah.
That's
So one of the
exciting.
things
Mm-hmm.
that we're doing too, and just to give a shout out to one of my staff, Gloria Spruce, because she's always thinking of different ideas of stuff that I need to do, because I have a lot to do already. But it is a great idea. So one of the things that we're looking at, and don't steal my idea, y'all. But definitely what we're doing is it's a academy, which is not something that we created, but it's learning academies. Because one thing that the pandemic has taught us is that you have to lean in with the resources that you have, right? So we have a set of expertise in-house through board, our staff, to do different webinars. So we're going to do a series of classes that's English for professionals. So it won't be traditional AEL students. So it will be working professionals like you and I, who may need that skill set to advance work or to be more effective at work. So we will charge a nominal fee for that. And then I think that she's actually trying to get me to do a grant writing class or something like that. So what that does is it does help with your program numbers. It still speaks to your mission, but it also helps you diversify your income and bring in unrestricted revenue to help with some of these capacity initiatives and gaps.
And
So,
it helps people understand your brand. You become that name that they think of when they need things. And
we are down to our final 2 minutes, believe it or not.
right.
Speed round. So this is the speed round. Last seeds for the fruit. And so these guys can circle back around and think about later and get in touch with you all.
Yeah, so any questions at all? I know we did get a comment from Calandra. She was saying she wasn't in favor of going back to the way things used to be. She's in favor of things going hybrid. So I agree with you a whole 100%. So we definitely have to look forward and move forward, because we're not going to go backwards. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree as well.
Definitely.
So any other questions or any things that you wanted us to discuss that we may not have, or something that we can consider for next symposium?
Everyone's so blown away. They're just, the minds like tick, tick. So you know, things that used to be considered frivolous, like fundraisers, people who actually do that for you, you know, things like that. Are now, are you saying that that should be part of the strategy? This isn't frivolous use of money anymore.
It should be part of the strategy, and just looking at, okay, how do I do a hybrid? Some nonprofits have done really well with virtual, others have not, but you have to know your market. You have to know your donors, as we were saying. So definitely you're gonna have to do a lot of trial and error as well in regards to that. And there's one thing that's gonna be really important is the social media campaigns. Those are something that cost you a little of nothing, but they're really impactful if you're recognizing donors or students for their contributions. You know, I'm all about best practices. So one thing to look at is the Humans of New York campaign. Have you all heard of that? So the Humans of New York campaign just really captivates the stories of folk from New York who deal with homelessness and things like that. But it really tells the story of the impact of services. It's really well done. So just kind of Google it, Humans of New York campaign. And there's a lot of best practices, a lot of coursework that's related to that can really grow your work beautifully. Another thing is strategic planning. We keep saying that. There's a new initiative out there to where folk are now embracing, and it's from the University of Alabama, I believe, and it's called strategic doing. So you can actually get a degree in this, y'all. And basically strategic doing of actually applying action to the work, but you're still thinking ahead, long-term, long range, but it's strategic doing because it's putting everyone in the active voice, active mindset, right? So basically looking at that and mirroring that to your fundraising as well. Because I think sometimes when we look at plan, it becomes dormant. We just like, okay, I got time. No, we know we don't. But the strategic doing, this is an instant call of action to get things moving. So definitely look into that resource. And then Mobile Cause and Network for Good are good resources as well. If you're looking for databases and different resources to do some of the social media communication and all, so they actually have some nominal cost to them, but it actually can grow your work. And then also helping with some of those texting campaigns is very vital as well.
Hey, would you guys mind putting together maybe a resource list of some of these links, and maybe Steve
Sure.
can share those out? I think
Sure.
that'd be very helpful.
Definitely.
If you put them, if you put them in the chat, we will be sharing the chat with everybody.
Okay. And just remember to be fluid. Be
Yep.
fluid and make friends. This is the year to make friends. So make friends, and you may have to erase some things, and don't be afraid to have to start again. This is a time of newness, and just embrace it.
Right. Be authentic and remember the human side of it. That's very important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
I want to
we'll
thank.
be doing surveys. It will be probably towards the end of the symposium, right, Steve?
Yes.
Okay. So definitely be able to give your feedback that way as well. But we have thoroughly enjoyed this. I mean, I've always enjoyed hanging out with my friends, Jonita and Tara, Jackie, and just talking about what we do. So thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yes,
It was a
thank
All
pleasure.
for sharing.
All right.
And Jackie, thank you so much for moderating this. You're an awesome moderator.
You did a great job reeling us in.
Yeah.
And Ernest, Jonita, and Tara, I have a page full of notes. This is a wealth of information was shared. We have just a couple of minutes before we start our next session. I wanted to give everybody a chance just to have a little bit of a break. And then if you come back at 10:15, session 2, best practices in distance education. And the presenter is Claire Gilliam, AEL instructor from Texas Region 5. So we'll see you in just a couple minutes.